My next guest is a former congressman out of Texas. Louie Gohmert is with us. My friend, the last time we talked about the Trump assassination attempt. Here we are again. It's almost deja vu. We've got a second attempt on the president's life. Now, this time around, I'll say this. We've gotten more information that seems to be a little bit more straightforward. We now know within 48 hours that this person didn't seem to get a shot off, that he is in custody. We have some of the social media, etc. There seems to be a lot of more questions surrounding the first one, but at the same time, we don't know how this guy knew that Trump was going to be there, was in line to get him within a few hundred yards at this golf course, etc., and penetrated even peripheral security. So what are your first thoughts on this?
Well, Jason, I go back to when I first ran for Congress and Vice President Dick Cheney was coming to my home area to help campaign for me. And his Secret Service came and they said, we have to, as Secret Service, they're telling me their job, we have to go along every route that he's going to travel, but especially any area where he is going to be out of a vehicle and exposed. We have to look in every direction. And if we can see it, we know because marksmen can hit easily from a really good ones from 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters. They've still got a chance. We have to go check it out and secure it. And that's what they did back then. Now, and I can't help but notice, they moved under Homeland Security instead of being under the Treasury Department where they've been from their beginning. But they're not doing their job. They're not doing what they used to say they had to do. They didn't do it in Butler, Pennsylvania, and they didn't do it there in West Palm Beach at the Trump golf course. It's not that hard. You know the president's going to be traveling up this hole, up this fairway, to have somebody, for heaven's sake, have them in a golf cart, but have them going along to make sure that he's not going to confront something. So they're still not doing their job. It's being poorly done. And of course, we know it's not everywhere that they're not doing their job. You know, when he was shot at and hit in Butler, Pennsylvania, the Secret Service was doing a fantastic job. They were going above and beyond when Jill Biden was shopping and making sure she was totally protected. So we know it's not a collapse of their job everywhere. It seems to be mainly when it comes to President Trump.
Well, that is quite the observation right there. And that leads me to my next point. I don't think this is the last attempt on his life.
No.
Now that we've had this second one in such rapid fashion, it's almost not an if but when situation.
Yeah.
The way that it was handled in the media initially really echoed the first attack, despite the first attack being on television. You know, at first it was reported that there were shots outside of the golf course. Then they weren't sure whether any shots had actually gotten off. And then by maybe the third, fourth version of the story, it was an assassination attempt. So given the way that the media has handled this yet again, and they're not taking it in a serious fashion. In fact, you're actually seeing blame shifting and the talk of rhetoric being heated up like somehow it's his fault that people are trying to shoot him. What are your thoughts? I mean, what does he need to do? Because clearly, even after this, security was lax. I can't see this being the last time. Does he need to just privatize his security 90+%, triple, quadruple it?
I don't know. It seems like, and I know he's applauded those that were around him protecting, and he did in Pennsylvania. But clearly, the planning is not there. Whether it's apathy or intentional disregard for the potential disaster, they're not doing their job. And there is still a problem, Jason, with honesty. as a judge, as a chief justice, I was kind of big on honesty, and I still am. So when the FBI and the initially the Secret Service, we're not sure if he was hit by a bullet or if it was, debris from the teleprompter. Jason, right after it happened, I heard the Secret Service say that, and I go back and replay, and I see the teleprompters are entirely intact. There is nothing that came from the teleprompter. So, and then for Christopher Wray, our FBI director, who I do not trust, I personally think he's a dishonest, dishonorable person. He comes before Congress and, well, we're still not quite sure if it was a bullet or not. Give me a break. I mean, it is just ridiculous when you have that kind of dishonesty coming from the top people in federal law enforcement. So, yeah, he may need to get extra help because the Secret Service is clearly not protecting him.
Let's hone in on Christopher Wray for a second. He also made the statement that Crooks got off 8 shots. Now, we now have this congressional report that says otherwise, that says that he was engaged by local law enforcement. That does seem to be what you hear. You hear 3 or 4 distinct shots and then a separate volley. And then finally, you hear what I assume is the kill shot, 8 to 10 seconds later. And then they, cremate the body before there can be a proper forensic investigation. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but what seems to have happened by the evidence is Crooks got these shots off. Law enforcement incapacitated him. He was not dead. He didn't have his gun, and the Secret Service only acted to cave the back of his skull out so he could never say a word. Now,
Yeah.
on the
And
other, go
Jason,
ahead.
if I might point out too, if you watch, and there's a video where the shooter is not the shooter, but the Secret Service sniper is on the rooftop back behind him. And when you see that in conjunction, okay, the shot's fired. When that sniper took a shot, I didn't see him ever adjust his scope. Um, it was like and if you ever shot long distances, I've shot 1,000-meter range at Quantico where they train Marines and Marine snipers. But you make an adjustment based on how far it is, what the wind is going that direction. He didn't have, maybe he was that good, he could do it even if it was the scope wasn't adjusted, but it was such a perfect shot. Uh, so he must have already seen either there's something there or that's a potential threat. He had his scope zeroed in on that very spot.
It seemed that way to myself as well. Now,
Yeah.
let's talk about this new attempted assassin. Number one, I'm always skeptical right away without seeing the evidence, but let's say this is the guy. It certainly seems that way, especially the way the media is treating it. He's a nightmare for the mainstream media. This guy
Yeah.
is, pro Ukraine over there, had his hair dyed, blue and yellow, the whole nine. And clearly, if you watch that Newsweek interview, he's very childlike. It's every talking point from the mainstream media. We could even diagnose this as a clear case of TDS. Where do you think this goes from here? Because the guy was a felon, wasn't supposed to have a gun. Somehow got that, everybody. It's weird how criminals can get guns. I know we want to keep banning them, but this guy was able to get it, not supposed to have it. Again, I'm very concerned with the fact he knew where to be. I think there is obviously the possibility of some type of accomplice. Also had a truck with fake plates on it or separate plates. Just looking at the peripheral evidence right now, what are your thoughts?
Uh, yeah, for somebody to completely act alone without anybody whomsoever getting any indications there's something wrong is pretty unlikely. But if you want to know what pushes a guy like that, you know, we've heard the rhetoric for over 3 years now, since they realized Trump was going to run again. despite the attempts to remove him from office, keep him from being able to run, all the lawfare, the lawsuits, the criminal charges that aren't going to end up sticking. They talk in terms of Hitler. He's been compared to, oh, like he's like Hitler. And we've been told for years, think about it. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know about how dangerous Hitler was, wouldn't you have killed Hitler before he had a chance to do all those things? And I mean, all of those things are planted like you got to kill him now before he can get back in office. But and I was listening to Kamala Harris today talking about, oh, we're going to have to prevent people from spending more than 7% on childcare. Well, I was an exchange student for a summer to the Soviet Union. I saw how that works. The government provides all the daycare, and you don't like what they taught them to believe. They totally were blinded by their education, but that's the kind of stuff she's promoting at the same time, talking about how dangerous Donald Trump is. So that has got to stop. They're encouraging people like this with Trump derangement syndrome, PTSD, whatever they is, whether it's we used to call them psychopaths. Now the DSM calls them antisocial personalities. Whatever, they should not be encouraged by the Democratic Party the way they are.
Do we have an election if a third assassin is successful before November?
That's why I pray every day that Trump will not be assassinated. And frankly, I prayed that President Obama would never be assassinated because I knew that would lead to a civil war. And I think the same thing. So if he's killed, J.D. Vance is a great guy. He would end up having to step into that. But people would know that the guy that was really going to step in and clean up the swamp was eliminated because they didn't want the swamp cleaned up. And I when I speak to conservatives, I tell them, please don't ever let them provoke you to violence. That's what Christopher Wray, that's what Merrick Garland, that's what Biden back when he had a mind, what they were wanting, and they would use it to shut conservatives down completely. So we can't engage in violence. But I'm telling you, they take out Trump. I'm extremely concerned. And they know the Marxists, my dear friend, I worked for him with him, David Horowitz. He says, back when he was a communist planning the riots in the late 60s and 70s in the US, their motto then, they still use it, the worse, the better. The more chaos you can create, the better it is for the Marxists to have their revolution and finally take over. They want the chaos because they think that allows them to fully take over and as a communist revolution. And so we've got to avoid that. But that is why I prayed that Obama would never be assassinated, and I pray that Trump will not be assassinated. And you can't just pray about it. As a Christian pastor friend said, just because you believe God's in control doesn't mean he wants you to lean on your shovel and pray for a hole. He expects you to use everything all the tools you have, everything at your disposal to try to make things work the way they should.
Well, let me just say this. Any assassination of a president or presidential candidate, high-level figure, is not going to be a good time for the American public. It will only be an excuse for more authoritarianism, more censorship, and really the advance of more thought crimes. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, you're hearing that talking point again and again. You got that viral video right now of Hillary Clinton alluding to the fact that people that are stoking the flames with this misinformation not only have to pay, through civil cases, but we should bring up criminal cases as well. I want to get your take on it on the flip side of the headlines. More TNT after this.
I have some even more exciting news.
And we are back. So what do you think about that? Because we've already seen the escalation of thought crime. I've brought up the Proud Boys, January 6th, etc. But the more and more that they talk about misinformation, disinformation, really the criminalization of speech in a time of assassination attempts on one particular presidential candidate. Listen, I'm no fan of Elon Musk. I'm probably one of his biggest critics, but them making a big deal out of him tweeting the point that nobody's trying to assassinate Biden or Harris, it's just an obvious point. They're not. The target is clearly Trump, and pointing that out while that side of the political spectrum is constantly talking about political violence. Listen, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm no fan of either party. It was the Republicans that got shot up at a softball field. You know, it wasn't the Democrats. So you've got to look at the historical precedent of who really are the people that snap and use violence.
Thank you. I appreciate you making the point. It's not being made enough here in the United States, but that it, it goes back, and I talked about it, for years on the House floor in Congress, but it's still true. They're moving us toward this completely Orwellian government. And the one quote I've been accurately quoted as saying was, the only thing Orwell got wrong was the year. It wasn't 1984. It's now. But and we even had Democrats saying in Congress, what we need is a ministry of truth, right out of 1984. And as I know you know, Jason, I mean, the Ministry of Truth rewrote truth every day to make the government look better. And you had to believe it. And it wasn't enough to repeat it and say, yeah, this is the truth. They had to be convinced you believed it. And if you didn't, then I don't know if you remember, the Ministry of Love would show up and they would take you to the basement of their building and torture you until you could convince them that you not only would say what they said, but you would believe what they said. And 2 + 2 was 5. So that's where we're headed with all of this. It's so clear to anybody that looks at it objectively. They're moving us toward that Orwellian totalitarian government where the government tells you what you're allowed to say and what you're allowed to believe. And I would commend to you Natan Sharansky's book. He wrote it in 2008, Defending Identity. And he makes the point that it's the lack of moral clarity, generations not being taught that there is a moral right and wrong. The lack of moral clarity is what keeps people from understanding what the truth is. They think an assassin is equal to the person that kills the assassin and stops them from killing. They equate the two things. So that's really, we've moved into that. We're not the free society where you can say what you believe without concern about being prosecuted and certainly being persecuted and being disallowed to communicate through the internet. I mean, we're seeing that. And yeah, Elon Musk, I don't think he's a fan of mine, but I appreciate his efforts to try to reopen free speech. We're so far away from Voltaire's comment that was quoted. Some say maybe someone else said it before Voltaire, but I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Now I disagree with what you say. I'm going to get you prosecuted. I'm going to have them go after your family. We're going to destroy everything you care about. I mean, this is a different society now, and we've got to get back to allowing free expression.
Well, I would agree with you. At the same time, I'm very skeptical. I think free speech, unfortunately, is a very low bar. And if that's what we're talking about, again, Twitter has its problems. It's the best kid in a bad neighborhood. But for instance, you look at the war in Ukraine right now and the misinformation and disinformation has supposedly been spewed. You've got Putin now talking about the escalation there, specifically Western and NATO satellite systems Musk puts up, by the way, with SpaceX, just pointing that out, and has contracts for. Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's one of my big concerns. we're not talking about World War III seriously in this country. You know, one of the highlights of the debate for me was Trump going off script because they weren't going to bring it up, the moderators. And he's like, there's a big thing here. You know, they wanted him to bend the knee and say, do you want Ukraine to win this war? Hey, newsflash, it's not a winnable war for Ukraine. The goals set out are imagination land. Let's be real about it. He's saying the other side has nuclear weapons and is willing to use them. Let's stop killing people. That's common sense. Putin has just said they voted to escalate. And are we at war with NATO and these Western countries? What does that mean? And if we do get an escalation where Putin ends up attacking a Western nation, something in Europe, is that the point where they just take Joe out, install Kamala before the election, and kind of legitimize her as a president beforehand, put us in this chaotic system? Because, again, if Trump's out of the way, maybe you don't need to do that. But we have a guy who's saying, you elect me, this is going to stop before I step into office. And I don't think the predator class wants that.
Yeah, well, it's a real dilemma for the Democrats because if they try to remove Biden before the election, then he will resist that because he wants to be there after the election so he can pardon his son Hunter. And they don't want him to pardon Hunter before the election because they're afraid that'll make people vote against Kamala Harris. So there's a bit of a dilemma there, quite a dichotomy in what to do for them. I don't think they want Biden to go ahead and pull the trigger, so to speak, and pardon his son before the election. And so that they really are not in a good place to try to remove him early. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk. I was in Washington last week talking to a lot of folks on the House floor. There's a lot of talk about, gee, she would appear much more presidential if she was the president. So just what you're saying, Jason, maybe they want to try to move him in early, but that comes with risks as well. So it's a problem for them.
And what do you think about the possibility of military escalation? Because, look, man, I'm a peace guy. I certainly don't want to go into a hot war with a first world country like Russia that's been to the meat grinder and back over the centuries, everybody. Not just the decades, over the centuries. People don't get that. What are your thoughts in this closing comment?
Well, I'm very concerned about it. And I think, it is important to give credit where credit's due. When Biden took office, he shut down so much, like shipping of natural gas to Europe, and he put such a clamp on the oil and gas industry that the price of oil and gas shot up. And Russia made, last I saw, around $600 billion more than they would have made had Biden not done all he had. So the U.S. funded the Russia side of the war, and now we're paying hundreds of billions to Ukraine to fund their side of the war. That may please the military-industrial complex, but it does not do anything good for the world. It lights a fire that may burn beyond where we want it to. So we need to stop it. We need to stop helping fund Russia. We need to stop helping fund Iran and get back to using our power financially to stop a lot of this stuff. And you probably heard President Trump say when he notified the Iranian leader, they sent a picture of his house. He said, "What do you mean by this?" He said, "What do you think we mean by it?" And the message was clear: you stop the killing or we're taking out you and your family.
Well, unfortunately, all of it's very, very good for people invested in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin at this point.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, Jason Bermas here. And as you may have heard, unfortunately, TNT, today's news talk, is no longer going to be with us. Now, I want this to be a stark reminder on how fragile the ecosystem of true independent media is. Now, obviously, I loved doing that show 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. But there is a silver lining to this. I am going to be doing more and more independent videos outside of just my Patriot.tv show, making sense of the madness, and we're going to be bringing back the shorter format and some really interesting live streaming interviews. So your support is totally going to be necessary in order to drive this forward, despite the censorship fiesta that we are seeing across really all platforms. So I want to thank all of you out there that have stuck it through many, many years. The Bermas Brigade, without you, I wouldn't be able to survive. So this is a big thank you. So please share the information, share the videos, let people know about the content, the shows, and of course, the documentary films. I love you guys, and I hope to see you on the flip side.